Hey guys, welcome to Chinese Stories. Tonight, we've got someone special for you, a man so good at surviving history. Nicknamed him the King of Endurance. Imagine living through 5 dynasties. Now, imagine working directly under 14 emperors and not just surviving, but thriving, while everyone around you either got killed, demoted, or exiled. That, Feng Dao. A man who kept his job while entire kingdoms collapsed. And no, he wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was front and center, prime minister, chancellor, advisor-in-chief. You'd think that would be a death sentence, right? Not for this guy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And hey, let me know in the comments, what city are you in and what time is it there right now? I love seeing where you all are tuning in from. Now, dim the lights and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So, who was Feng Dao? If you were expecting a heroic general charging into battle, or a righteous scholar dying for his beliefs, you were in the wrong story. Feng Dao was different. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't brave in the typical sense, but he was smart. And by smart, I mean next level political survivalist. The kind of guy who reads the room before it even forms. The kind who always seems to be standing just outside the blast radius. Born in 882 AD, right as the Tang Dynasty was crumbling, Feng Dao came into a world already falling apart. China back then was basically a political blender. Rebellions, warlords, betrayals. It was Game of Thrones every week, but with more poetry and bureaucracy. Most people barely survived. Feng Dao, he was busy climbing ladders. Now, let's be clear, this story isn't about some noble patriot who sacrificed everything for his country. Nope. Feng Dao didn't die for a cause. He lived for one, not dying. And that alone makes him fascinating. He was, in every sense, the opposite of a martyr. While others went down with their emperors like loyal bodyguards in a bad movie, Feng Dao quietly changed uniforms and walked into the next scene like nothing happened. And here's the crazy part. Emperors kept hiring him. Dynasty falls? Oh hey Feng Dao, we need someone who knows how to run this place. New emperor, same job, again and again. It's like being the manager of a restaurant that gets rebranded every year. And somehow, you're always still on payroll. You'd think that would make people suspicious. And it did. He got called all sorts of names. Traitor, opportunist, bootlicker. But guess what? While his critics were getting silenced, sometimes permanently, he was sipping tea in the same chair, signing official documents like nothing ever changed. It's honestly kind of genius. So why didn't anyone take him out? Why didn't one of those 14 emperors say, wait, this guy worked for the last 5 losers. How is he still here? Good question. We'll get into that. But for now, just sit with this image. A quiet man, no armor, no army, just a pen and a calm face, standing in the ruins of one dynasty after another, like a ghost who keeps getting promoted. This isn't just a story about history. It's about people, about how, in times of chaos, the most powerful weapon might not be a sword, but knowing when to speak, when to shut up, and when to quietly walk into the next emperor's office like you belong there. That's Feng Dao, the man who never died, the man who somehow always stayed. Before, Feng Dao became the guy everyone whispered about in court. How is he still alive? He was just another kid, born into a time when chaos was the norm. He came from what you'd call a humble background. Nothing flashy, no royal blood, no inherited power. Just a smart kid with a good head on his shoulders, growing up during the messy final years of the Tang Dynasty. If China was a house back then, it was already on fire, and everyone was either running for the exits or trying to steal furniture on the way out. Imagine this. You are born in 882 AD. The empire is falling apart. Provinces are breaking away. Warlords are carving up the land like it's pizza night, and people are switching allegiances faster than they can write their new job titles. You want to live? You don't fight harder, you learn faster. That's exactly what Feng Dao did. From a young age, he saw that brute strength might win battles, but brains keep you breathing. He was a bookworm, sure, but not the nerdy kind. More like the type who watches quietly, notices who's yelling too loud, who's plotting behind doors, who's rising, who's falling. He studied Confucian classics, but let's be honest, what he really mastered was human behavior. He saw early on that in a world of collapsing orders, the biggest threat wasn't an enemy army. It was being on the wrong side of power when the dust settled. By his late 22nd, Feng Dao had already worked his way into the local bureaucracy. Not exactly glamorous, but smart. You don't start at the top when heads are rolling. You start low. Keep your head down. Make yourself useful. And wait. That's what he did. Slowly, quietly, with the patience of someone who understood that survival wasn't about being noticed. It was about being needed. One key moment, when he got a chance to serve under the warlord, Liu Shouguang. Not exactly a household name, even in China, but at the time, Liu was trying to carve out his own kingdom in northern China. Feng Dao joined him not out of loyalty, but out of logic. Liu had power. Feng Dao had skills. It was a good match for a while. Here's the twist. Liu was kind of a mess. Brutal, unpredictable, not exactly king material. Most people would panic and try to distance themselves. But Feng Dao, he didn't rebel. He didn't protest. He just waited. And sure enough, when Liu eventually got crushed by another warlord, guess who walked away unharmed? Yep, Feng Dao. Not only did he not get punished, the new guy looked at him and said, "Hey, this guy knows how to run stuff. Keep him." That's the pattern you start seeing over and over. Feng Dao never grabbed power. He just stayed close enough to it to be useful, but never so close that he became a threat. He didn't fight for the crown. He kept the lights on while crowns were being exchanged. Now, think about this from the perspective of any new ruler. You've just taken over a chaotic kingdom. You don't know who to trust. But Tears, this calm, capable guy who already knows the system, already knows the people, and has no ambition to steal your job. That's gold. That's Feng Dao. So, if you're wondering how someone gets into a position to serve 14 emperors, this is how it starts. Not with glory or drama, but with observation, patience, and knowing exactly when to speak and when to stay silent. Next up, we'll see how Feng Dao walked straight into a crumbling court and somehow walked out with a promotion. So here's where things start getting wild. Feng Dao lands his first official job in a real royal court, working for a guy named Li Cunxu, a warlord who had just declared himself emperor, founding what's now called the later Tang Dynasty. Sounds impressive, right? Except, spoiler alert, Li Cunxu was not exactly emperor material. Sure, he could win battles, but running a country? Different story. And Feng Dao quietly sitting in the back with his documents and a calm expression. Probably knew it. Li Cunxu was a performer at heart, literally. He loved music, theater, and surrounded himself with actors and entertainers. Court meetings turned into improv nights, military plans. Nah, let's stage a play instead. Imagine trying to run a country while your boss is rehearsing a monologue. That's what Feng Dao was dealing with. Most officials either sucked up to the emperor's weird habits or risked their necks trying to speak truth to power. Feng Dao did neither. He just kept working. Writing, managing, keeping the machine going quietly in the background while the emperor danced on the table. And guess what? That kind of steady energy stands out, especially when everything else is falling apart. Now, Li Cunxu's rule didn't last long. Surprise, surprise, the people got tired of the chaos. A rebellion broke out, led by one of his own generals, and the emperor ended up dead in his own palace. Brutal, yes. But here's a part you rehear for. When the palace burned and bodies hit the floor, Feng Dao didn't just survive, he got promoted. Seriously. The rebel leader, Li Siyuan, takes over, and instead of clearing house, he looks around and goes, "Who can help me actually run this thing?" And someone goes, "Well, Feng Dao's still alive." Boom. New emperor, same guy doing the paperwork. Why? Because Feng Dao understood something most people didn't. Loyalty is expensive, but usefulness is priceless. He never clung to one emperor. He clung to order. He served whoever could keep the country somewhat stable, not because he was a traitor, but because he knew, in the end, it wasn't about the name on the throne. It was about whether people ate, lived, and didn't die in pointless wars. So instead of going down with the last guy like a loyal fool, he walked over to the new boss, rolled up his sleeves, and said, "Where were we?" It wasn't shameless. It was survival. It was strategy. And here's the thing. People noticed, both the new emperor and the common folks, because while other officials were making power grabs or getting executed, Feng Dao was out here, making sure roads got fixed, taxes got collected, and schools stayed open. He wasn't exciting, but he worked. And in a world full of chaos, boring worked. Did people judge him? Absolutely. The scholars hated him. They said he had no backbone, no principles, but Feng Dao didn't flinch. He once said something like, "If I can help keep people from starving, why should I care who sits on the throne? That's not betrayal. That's practicality." So let's break it down. His first emperor, a failed artist with delusions of grandeur. The court was a mess. The empire collapsed. The guy got killed. And Feng Dao still standing. Not just standing, rising. That's the Feng Dao pattern. He doesn't fight for the throne. he outlasts it, and that's only the beginning. You think after one dynasty collapse, Feng Dao might get cautious, maybe lie low, take a break, write a memoir or something. But nope, he kept going. Just like that one coworker who somehow survives every company layoff, not only still employed, but now your manager. That was Feng Dao. And in the years that followed, he didn't just survive one more regime change, he survived 4. Let's paint the scene. After Li Siyuan took over as emperor of the later Tang, Feng Dao became one of the top officials in the empire. Smooth sailing? Not even close. These emperors had trust issues the size of mountains. Paranoia was part of the job description. People were executed for sneezing in the wrong direction. And yet, Feng Dao, untouched. How? Because he had a secret weapon, neutrality. The man was like Teflon. No political faction could stick to him. Whenever power shifted, Feng Dao wasn't in anyone's way. He never gave speeches about undying loyalty. He never cried when an emperor died. He just nodded, kept working, and remembered names. That last part matters. Feng Dao knew who to talk to, when to talk, and most importantly, when not to talk. Fast forward a few years, the later Tang gets wiped out by the later Jin. This was one of the weirdest dynasties ever. It was basically a client state of the Khitan, a nomadic people from the north who helped the new emperor Shi Jingtang take the throne. In return, he gave them massive chunks of northern China, like actual land. That made people furious. Did Feng Dao protest? Nope. He signed the land treaty. Yep. He was the one who drafted and sealed the official agreement that handed over 16 key cities to the Khitan. A lot of historians still roast him for that. They say he betrayed the country. But from Feng Dao's point of view, he was preventing a full-scale invasion. He was thinking about national pride. He was thinking about the millions of civilians who would have died if there'd been war. You see, that's the thing about Feng Dao. He didn't play hero, he played doctor. If the patient, Akai, the empire, had a broken leg, he didn't try to teach it how to walk straight. He just splinted it and kept it moving. After the later, Jin collapsed. Yes, another dynasty gone. Guess what? Feng Dao gets invited to serve in the next regime, the later Han. No application, no interview. They just handed him a seat at the table because, well, who else knew how to run the country at this point? And when that dynasty fell, you already know. He packed up his scrolls, walked into the office of the next emperor of the later Zhou, and asked, where were we? By this point, his legend was a solid. Imagine being in the room when the empire changes hands and everyone's panicking, and the Feng Dao walks in with a calm face like he's just back from lunch. That was the vibe. Unbothered, unshaken, efficient. But let's be real, not everyone was a fan. Many saw him as spineless, a human windsock. But it's easy to say that when you've never had to survive in a world where being too loyal could get you killed. Feng Dao didn't betray people, he betrayed expectations. And in doing so, he kept systems running when everyone else was screaming. At this point, he'd outlived 4 emperors, helped build and clean up after 5 dynasties, signed treaties, managed cities, balanced impossible politics, and somehow still found time to write and preserve texts, including parts of the Confucian canon. Was he perfect? Not at all. But was he necessary? Absolutely. And the emperors, every single one of them, knew it. At this point, Feng Dao had basically become a piece of imperial furniture. Thrones came and went, emperors rose and fell, but he stayed exactly where he was, right in the center of government, pen in hand, face calm as ever. Imagine a country where rulers change faster than iPhone models, but the guy running the files and policies, still the same. Feng Dao was like the human version of save as template. Let's do a quick count. He served under 14 emperors. That's not a typo. 14. Across 5 different dynasties. Later Tang, later Jing, later Han, later Zhou, and finally, the beginning of the Northern Song. If Chinese history was a Netflix series, Feng Dao was in every season, never missing a single episode. And more than that, he was often the one holding the script behind the scenes. How did he do it? Well, he didn't just adapt, he anticipated. Feng Dao had this sixth sense for knowing when power was about to shift. He'd see signs no one else saw. An army movement here, a tense-looking court there, an emperor who stopped listening. While others were betting everything on the current ruler, Feng Dao was already preparing documents for the next one. He didn't resist change. He flowed with it. Like water, you can stab water. You can stab arrested. It slips through your fingers and just keeps moving. That was Feng Dao. Other ministers tied their careers to a single emperor. He tied his to the system. He was never anyone's man. He was the government's man. That's why they all kept him. What's wild is that emperors trusted him even knowing he had served their enemies. How? Because Feng Dao made himself non-threatening. He never built a personal army, never created a power faction, never made loud political statements. He just got the job done, cleanly, efficiently, no drama. One emperor even called him the steadiest hand in the storm. Another said he has no ambition but to preserve order. And honestly, they weren't wrong. He wasn't trying to become prime minister so he could change the world. He just wanted the wheels to keep turning. And that's what made him so dangerous and so essential. See, Feng Dao was like that IT guy at your company, quiet, behind the scenes, but the only one who knows the password to everything. You could fire him, but good luck running the place without him. There's also this wild detail. During one of the dynasty transitions, while the capital was under siege and officials were fleeing, Feng Dao didn't run. He stayed, didn't hide, didn't panic, just kept working. And when the new emperor walked into the palace, there he was calm, collected, already preparing the new documents. It's almost funny, like he was saying, "Welcome, here's your schedule." But here's where it gets complicated. The people around him, not always so chill. Many scholars thought he was a disgrace. He has no loyalty, they said. He's like a leaf in the wind. But Feng Dao didn't flinch. He believed that his job wasn't to pick sides. It was to prevent collapse. In a world where political ideals got people killed, he chose something rarer, continuity. Think about it. When an emperor dies, systems fall apart. Tax collection, food distribution, infrastructure, all of it breaks if someone's not there to hold the glue. Feng Dao was that glue. He wasn't flashy, but he was the reason things didn't fall into complete ruin. So, yes, while emperors were playing chess with each other, trying to claim power, Feng Dao was the board itself, always there, always steady. And maybe that's the secret. He never wanted to be king. He just made sure the kingdom worked. By now, Feng Dao had become a living legend, but not exactly the lovable kind. People respected his position, sure, but they didn't like him. You know that one coworker who's always around, always calm, always surviving, no matter who the boss is, and everyone's secretly like, how is this guy still here? That was Feng Dao, except with emperors and warlords instead of managers and team leads. Scholars hated him. Historians roasted him. Poets made fun of him in cryptic verses. He was called everything from two-faced to cold-blooded. One famously bitter writer even said, Feng Dao's loyalty changes with the wind, but his face never changes expression. Ouch. But here's the strange part. For all the hate, no one ever touched him. No assassinations. No sudden executions. No mysterious disappearances. That's weird in Chinese imperial politics, where losing favor usually meant losing your head. So, why was Feng Dao untouchable? Simple. He was too useful to kill. Every regime needed him. Every emperor, even the most paranoid, realized that Feng Dao was a threat. He was the emergency backup system. He didn't try to gain power. He tried to preserve it, and that made him rare. See, most political players either picked a side or built a faction. Feng Dao picked function. He never had his own gang of officials. He didn't form secret alliances. He didn't push personal agendas. He was just there, doing the job. While others fought for influence, he quietly rewrote tax codes and approved road repairs. There's this story about how a group of younger officials tried to push him out, saying he's old, irrelevant, out of touch. Feng Dao didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He just listened, nodded, and then calmly listed every single project currently in progress. Who was handling it? Where the money was coming from? What the deadlines were? By the end, the emperor looked at the young guys and said, "Can any of you do that?" Crickets. Feng Dao kept his job. That's the thing. While others played chess, Feng Dao played calendar. He knew the budgets, the names, the court routines, the food distribution schedules. He was the human database. You couldn't replace him without risking collapse. And emperors, no matter how ruthless, didn't gamble on that kind of loss. But let's be honest, it wasn't just usefulness that kept him safe. It was also how he behaved. Feng Dao had mastered the art of not standing out. He didn't show off. He never acted like he was smarter than the emperor, even when he clearly was. He spoke softly, never interrupted, always bowed the right way. He was the perfect side character in a room full of main characters trying to kill each other. Even his personal life was quiet. No scandals, no power-hungry sons, no luxury flexes. He lived modestly, dressed simply, and even refused certain promotions because he felt they'd bring unnecessary attention. That's next-level survival thinking. So yes, people mocked him, called him cowardly, said he had no soul. But the truth, he was playing a different game. While others fought for glory, Feng Dao fought for stability. He didn't want a statue. He wanted a working government. And when you think about it like that, maybe the real reason he never got killed is because killing him would have meant everything else fell apart. In a world addicted to drama, Feng Dao was calm. In a court filled with pride, he chose humility. And in an age where loyalty got you dead, he chose wisdom. If you've been thinking Feng Dao was just a bureaucratic robot code, calculating, soulless, it's time to shift gears. Because beneath that calm, quiet surface was actually a man with ideas, big ones. He didn't talk about them much, but he lived them. And that's where this story gets deep. See, it's easy to paint him as some flip-flopper who only cared about keeping his head on straight. But that's not the full picture. The truth is, Feng Dao had a philosophy one that might sound strange at first, but actually made sense in the world. He lived in peace over pride, survival over slogans, stability over sacrifice. He wasn't just going with the flow because he was weak. He chose to go with the flow because he believed the river mattered more than the rocks. While others fought for loyalty or righteous rebellion, Feng Dao was asking, will the people eat this winter? Will the roads stay open? Will the schools keep teaching? It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And he didn't keep these thoughts to himself. He actually wrote them down. Yep, among his many official duties, Feng Dao also helped compile and edit classic Confucian texts, including versions of the 9 classics that became the basis for imperial education for centuries. Think about that. The same man people accused of having no principles was literally preserving the books of principles for future generations. Talk about irony. But here's where it gets interesting. Feng Dao's writings reveal someone who deeply respected order, not just political order, but moral order. He believed chaos was the real enemy. That when governments fail, it wasn't just emperors who died. It was the farmers, the children, the poor, the forgotten. So while scholars were writing essays about righteous death, Feng Dao was out there making sure water systems still functioned. He once said something along the lines of, "A good minister does not die with a fallen king, but helps the living rebuild what was lost. That's not cowardice, that's responsibility." He wasn't running from duty. He was expanding the definition of duty itself. Still, people didn't like that. To many Confucian purists, dying for your ruler was the highest virtue. To them, Feng Dao was basically a sellout in a scholar's robe. But to the common folk, he was a quiet hero. Because when you're struggling to survive, you don't care if your minister died with honor. You care if your city still has food. That, the philosophical tug of war, Feng Dao represented. He forced people to question the traditional hero mold. What's better, a dead loyalist or a living reformer? A fiery speech before execution or decades of boring, effective governance? He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to outlast disaster. And not just for himself, for everyone. And yet, even with all this wisdom, he stayed humble. He didn't build schools in his name. He didn't demand statues. He just kept the system going, one decision at a time. Even his edits to the classics were understated. He didn't rewrite. He clarified, like someone dusting off old glass so others could see through it more clearly. So maybe he wasn't a philosopher in a flashy sense. No grand manifestos, no dramatic sermons. But in his quiet persistence, in his choice to live his values instead of shout them, Feng Dao left behind something stronger than a slogan. He left a blueprint, Let's just say it plainly. Feng Dao's secret sauce wasn't loyalty, it was detachment. He didn't serve people, he served stability. And when you see his career through that lens, everything suddenly makes perfect sense. To most ministers back then, picking a side was a moral duty. You either stood with your emperor till the bitter end, or you were labeled a traitor. That is how history usually divides people: hero or villain, loyalist or opportunist. But Feng Dao? He sidestepped the whole game. He wasn't trying to win history, he was trying to keep it from falling apart. What made him different was this: he never saw the empire as belonging to one man. To him, the state was bigger than any single ruler, the emperor temporary, the bureaucracy permanent. If a new emperor came along and the people could still farm, eat, and sleep safely, that was a win. Who wore the crown didn't matter. What mattered was that the roof didn't collapse. And that meant Feng Dao had to walk a very fine line: too loyal, and he died with a failing regime; too ambitious, and he looked like a threat. So he perfected the art of just being available. Always useful, never dangerous. Always present, never dominant. Now here's where it gets spicy. Some folks thought he was a coward for not taking a stand, but was he? Let's look at his results. Every time the empire was about to fall into deeper chaos, Feng Dao was there, keeping systems running, writing policies, and yes, swapping allegiances if it meant avoiding mass bloodshed. Take the later Jin dynasty as an example. When the emperor handed over territory to the Khitan people, everyone screamed betrayal. But Feng Dao supported the move. Why? Because he knew what a full-scale war would cost. In his eyes, surrendering a few cities was the price for sparing millions of lives. That's cold math. But in a time when death was currency, it might have been the only sane choice. He believed that ministers should serve the country, not the ruler. That's a bold statement, especially in a world where emperors were treated like living gods. But Feng Dao never worshipped power. He respected order, and that subtle shift in thinking is what allowed him to navigate the most unstable period in Chinese history without ever getting executed. There, another layer too. Feng Dao wasn't trying to rise forever. In fact, he rejected titles more than once, turned down promotions. Why? Because he didn't want power, he wanted influence without the spotlight. He knew power attracts jealousy, influence, handled, right, can last a lifetime. And it did. By the time he was an old man, Feng Dao had become a symbol not of greatness, but of endurance. He outlived kings, survived coups, and still had the respect of every emperor who came through the door. Not because he flattered them, but because he made their jobs easier. There's even a story that one emperor asked him, "Why do you stay, even when your loyalty is questioned?" And he replied, "If no one stays, who will teach the next ruler how to avoid the last one's mistakes?" That's not disloyalty. That's institutional memory. So, no, he wasn't a hero in the poetic sense. He wasn't out there leading rebellions or writing fiery manifestos. But he was a firewall, a circuit breaker. The last adult in the room when everyone else wanted to burn it down. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of hero people didn't know they needed. So, after decades of regime changes, rebellions, betrayals, treaties, and titles, Feng Dao finally reached the end of his journey. He died in 954 AD at the age of 73, a peaceful death in his bed, surrounded by respect and records, no exile, no poison, no forced suicide, just quiet closure. And in Chinese politics, that might be the rarest achievement of all. But here's $1 million question. Did he win, or did he just survive? To some, Feng Dao was the ultimate sellout, a man who chose comfort over courage. He didn't die for any emperor. He didn't fight injustice with fiery words or noble sacrifice. He bent with the wind, switched sides when needed, and yes, he signed some truly controversial policies, including surrendering territory that still makes historians cringe today. But if you ask another kind of audience, the villagers, the taxpayers, the school kids learning from the Confucian texts he preserved, they might say he did win, because he gave them something that flashy heroes rarely do: continuity. He kept the water flowing, the food arriving, the schools running, while everyone else chased glory. Feng Dao chased functionality. And here's the real twist. In his final years, he wasn't proud of everything he'd done. Yep, the man who had outlived 5 dynasties started writing poetry in his old age, some of it soft, even regretful. He wondered aloud whether bending too far had made him lose his shape, whether choosing peace over principle had made him less. There was no dramatic confession, no last-minute redemption arc. Just quiet reflections, like an old man staring out the window on a rainy day, asking himself the questions no one else could answer. Was he a genius ahead of his time? Maybe a coward, depends on who's judging. A stabilizer in the storm? Absolutely. But one thing's for sure. He made a choice that most of us never have to make between being right and being useful. And honestly, that might be the hardest choice of all. His legacy today, still debated. Some textbooks praise him as a rare statesman who valued peace over pride. Others dismiss him as a symbol of political spinelessness. But you know what history can't deny? He was there. He saw it all. And in a world that chewed up and spat out its most loyal servants, Feng Dao somehow walked through the fire in the same plain robe, year after year, emperor after emperor. He didn't leave behind monuments or famous last words. No glorious martyrdom, just a paper trail of decisions that kept a country from falling apart. Not perfect ones, but functional ones. So, did he win? Let me put it this way, he outlasted everyone else. And in a time of swords and chaos, that alone makes him unforgettable. And now, as we close the chapter on Feng Dao, take a deep breath. Let the noise of shifting dynasties fade away. No more emperors shouting. No more court politics buzzing in your ears. Just a quiet man with a brush in his hand, choosing calm over chaos, subtle over loud. Maybe you're lying in bed right now. Lights dimmed, eyelids heavier than you thought they'd be. And maybe, just maybe, there's a small part of you that understands him now, not agreeing with everything, but seeing the wisdom in stillness, the strange kind of courage it takes to not fight, but to stay. Imagine him now, not in the courtroom, but walking slowly through a garden, old robes rustling in the breeze, watching the next emperor from afar, knowing he's done all he can. You don't have to be the loudest to matter. Sometimes, the ones who hold the world together are the ones you barely notice. So let your thoughts settle. Let the story sink in. And if your eyes are closing, that's okay. Feng Dao is still watching the storm, so you don't have to. Good night.